Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are covering topic 12, support, movement, and locomotion. The first subtopic is 12.1, bones. Before we get into the content, let's talk about the topic itself. What do you think the term support refers to? When we're talking about support, usually we're talking about helping each other out, right? And your bones actually does something like that to you. The skeleton has a main role in actually holding the body structure clear to the ground and also gives its shape. Try to think about 3 other functions of the mammalian internal skeleton. What do you think our skeleton is there for? So we know that it does this supporting role. It supports us to stand straight, stand above the ground, but it does other things as well. So let me give you a clue. Here's the first clue, second, and the third one. So one of the functions of the skeleton is to protect delicate internal organs from mechanical injury. For example, the cranium, the skull, protects the brain. The vertebral column protects the spinal cord, and the ribs protect the heart and the lungs. Another important function of the skeleton is that they attach muscles or muscles attached to them and serves as levers, enabling movement to take place. The third function of the skeleton is to produce blood in the bone marrow of the ribs and the long bones. So here's your bone, and inside of them it's not just pores, but it has these tissues called the bone marrow. Bone marrow is a spongy tissue inside some of your bones, such as your hip and your thigh bones, and they contain stem cells. These stem cells can develop into the red blood cells that carry oxygen through your body, and the white blood cells that fight infections, and the platelets that help with blood clotting. So now if you have your Cornell notes ready, please write down your first learning objective, 12A. Identify and describe from diagrams, photographs, and real specimens the main bones of the forelimb, which includes the humerus, radius, ulna, and the scapula of a mammal. So while we're talking about the forelimb is the upper limb, so we're going to talk about the top bits, and this consists of the arm and the hard bones. So mainly this part right here. So there are 3 main parts of the forelimb or the upper limb we're going to learn about today. If you have time, you can go to this website, but it's a little bit heavy, as in it does take a lot of data. So if you have a lot of data, you might want to check this website out. It's called anatomylearning.com, and just Google that up and you can actually find a lot of parts about the bones and even the muscles. You can download this on your iPad if you have one as well, to look into the detailed structure of the bones and also the muscles as well. You can pick the upper limb area and it'll show you so many pretty much very, very good diagrams, 3D diagrams. So let's look into the first bone called the humerus, which is a long bone that fits into the scapula. Humerus is the bone right here, this very long bone. The humerus is a long bone and it has a rounded head at its upper end. So when the question of the exam asks you about the structure of the humerus, say it's a long bone with a rounded head at the upper end. It fits into the glenoid cavity of the scapula to form a ball and socket joint. At the lower end right here, it has a roller-shaped surface. Next is a forearm that is made or that consists of 2 long bones called the radius and the ulna. So here is the top part right here, and this one is your humerus, and at the bottom part, this here you have your radius that is a little bit of a thinner bone here, and then it goes out like that, and you have your ulna that starts off pretty wide, and then it does narrow down a little bit at the bottom. The forearm consists of two long bones called the ulna and the radius. The radius extends from the elbow to the thumb. So here, your elbow is here to your thumb. It lies on the outer side when the palm faces upwards. Face palm. I'm face palming myself right now for making mistakes. The ulna lies on the outer side of the forearm upper end and has a notch where the humerus fits. So here, you remember your humerus is the top one here. That's the radius, and that's the ulna. Next is the scapula, which is a flat triangular bone. Here we have two scapula here, over here, and over here. And this is your clavicle, but we're focusing on this triangular shape right here. At the back, you can see it much more clearly. The scapula is a flat triangular bone that is attached to the rib cage. At the outer edge is a depression called a glenoid cavity where upper end of the humerus fits. So we're talking about this part. Remember, a cavity just means like a hole. When you have a cavity in your teeth, that means that you have a hole in your tooth and it can get infected. And so when we're talking about cavity, the glenoid cavity is basically a hole over here, and they say that's where the humerus fits. So the scapula, actually at the front of the, if you're looking at the front of the body, it'll look like this, and then behind at the back you can see how fully triangular-ish shape it is. So now we're looking about the movement part of this topic. So support, we're looking at the bones that give support, and we learned about the four main bones, So we looked at the scapula, which is a triangular shape. This one doesn't have scapula here. It's a triangular shaped bone, and then we looked at the humerus that is attached to it, and then you have the radius and the ulna. And now we're looking at movement and how the bones actually give us movement as well. So all of your bones actually have restrictions in a way that they can't move everywhere as much as you would imagine it to. So if you think about one ability and one restriction, I mean, if you stretch out your arm right now and move it around, can it move 360 degrees? Does it only move 180 degrees? Does it move 90 degrees? That is what we mean by the restriction. So try to compare the movement of your shoulders and your elbow. So try to move your shoulders now. Just like when you are about to warm up from an exercise, you do roll your shoulders. So try to roll your shoulders now, and then try to extend your elbow. Both of the movements are pretty different actually. So think about it here. There are two types of movement: free movement in many planes, or movement in only one plane. Movement in many planes means that you can move it around, and one plane means that it's just like 180 degree. You can't go more than that. You can't go 360. So actually, for your shoulder, you have free movement in many planes. It does go pretty 360. For your elbow, you can only move it in one plane. I would say you can go either, I mean, you can make it into like a 90 degree as well, but mostly to extend it, you only have that like 180 degrees extending. So the reason why we have this restriction or even ability of moving or movement, types of movement, is because of the joints. What kind of joints are there that joins the bones together that actually allows it to move and give that ability to move, or give that restriction of what kind of movement that is allowed? So 12.2, we're gonna talk about the joints. What are joints? Joints are areas where two bones are attached or two bones meet to allow movement. They are made up of fibrous connective tissue and cartilage. So think about where two bones meet, and that is what you call the joint. Here are different types of joints, and how do you think people would group them together? Ooh, I think I should be giving you pictures physically when I give you the slide. Please ignore that. Anyway, joints are grouped according to the type of motion. So here we have the different kinds. You have the ball and socket joint, so where two bones meet. You have this condyloid joint, you have a plane joint, saddle joint, hinge joint, and the pivot joint. Don't worry, in O levels we're only going to mention and talk about the hinge joint at the elbow and the ball and socket joint, not just at the hip, but we're going to talk about the one that actually connects the humerus to the scapula. So this is your next learning objective. Describe the type of movement permitted, that means allowed, by the ball and socket joint and the hinge joint of the forelimb. Ball and socket joints are basically when you have two bones, you have one that has a rounded head and it fits into the socket or the cavity of another bone. Something like that. That's what we call the ball. Okay, I'm gonna move this. Can I move this? Yep. And this part, the rounded part, you call that the ball, and this one right here that has a cavity, you call that the socket. For hinge joints, that allows 180-degree movement of the bones in one plane only. For example, the elbow and the knee joints. So something like this. So you have the humerus and then your ulna, forming the hinge joint. So if you have time later as well, try to watch this video about joints and the 3D structures of joints. It's a very, very good video. I'll link it in the description box below. Okay. Lastly, this topic, we're going to talk about antagonistic muscles. So that's 12.3, our new subtopic. If you were here with me live, I would ask you, what are muscles? And what does the term antagonistic mean? I'll ask you, how would you explain the term antagonistic muscle? And can you give me one example of a muscle that is not antagonistic? Can you give me one example of an antagonistic muscle and its location? Actually, we have learned about antagonistic muscles before, and we're going to talk about that after this. Okay, muscles, what are they? They are organs that are made up of muscle tissue. They enable contraction or tension in an animal body for movement or locomotion. So the job of muscles and muscle cells is basically to contract and relax, and that helps to make movement. Antagonistic means that they do the opposite. Antagonist and antagonist muscles often occur in pairs, and they are called antagonistic pairs. So if you want to define antagonistic muscles, for example, you have to say they come in pairs, and as one muscle contracts, the other one relaxes. So the one that we've learned before in nervous system is actually this right here in your iris, the muscles of your iris. You have your circular and your radial muscles that help you to focus. I'm sorry, not to focus, but help you to control the size of the pupil. Another antagonistic muscle set that we have learned before was in the digestive system. That was in topic 5, which is to do with peristalsis. So we call that the longitudinal and the circular muscles. Okay, so we are also going to talk about 12C. This is your learning objective. Describe the action of the antagonistic muscles at the hinge joint only. So how do muscles move at a joint? Muscles pull, but they never push. They pull only when they contract, and when they contract, they decrease in length. Returning to its original length is called relaxing, and they do not expand. Tendons that attach muscles to the bone. So we talked about the joints. Remember, joint is where two bones meet. Tendons are tissues that attach muscles to the bones, and tendons do not stretch. Muscles are arranged in antagonistic pairs. They apply the force on either side of the bone that are required to move. So we have this term called flexor. Flexor means one muscle of the pair that contracts to bend the limb at the joint. When this happens, the extensor, one muscle of the pair, then relaxes. The extensor contracts to straighten the limb of the joint. As it does, the flexor relaxes. So remember the word, I think you are going to be more familiar with flexing. So when someone's like, oh, he's flexing, I think that's a term where people usually talk about like kind of showing or being proud of something, showing something off. So that's a flex. But I think it does originate from the term flexing, as in people working out and then they flex their muscles. So whenever they flex, they don't extend their arms, they actually kind of fold their arms, don't they? So that's what we mean by the flexor. You bend the limb to the joint. So when we're talking about the extensor, it's extending, so it's straightening the limb to the joint. So the ones we're looking at here, the pair at the hinge joint, is the biceps and the triceps. Basically, when you are, so the flexor here is the biceps, because when the biceps contract, this joint will then actually bend. So that's the word we're looking at, bending. And when the triceps muscle contract instead, that means the biceps will relax. This is going to turn into an extended arm, so that'll be 180. So the tricep muscle is what we call the extensor. So here, as we can see, when you want to flex or flexion, the biceps would contract and the triceps relaxes and it becomes longer here than the biceps. When we extend, so during extension, biceps would relax. You can see that it becomes longer and the triceps would then contract to extend this arm. And that is all for today, guys. So thank you so much for spending time with me. I hope you guys can have a pretty awesome day today, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!